The sound of a pistol firing echoed through Gila City, Arizona, as Nora Zimmerman's world shattered into 1,000 pieces. Not because the bullet had found her, but because the words that followed from her father's mouth were far more deadly to her dreams than any lead could ever be. It settled then. Abraham Zimmerman announced to the gathering of townspeople in their front parlor, his voice carrying the finality of a judge's gavel. "My daughter will marry Edgar Thornton in 2 weeks' time. The contracts have been signed." Nora stood frozen by the fireplace, her 18 years of life suddenly feeling like a cage closing around her. The spring of 1876 was supposed to be her season of possibility, not imprisonment. Her fingers clutched at the embroidery she'd been working on, the needle pricking her thumb and drawing blood that matched the red roses in her pattern. "Father, you never spoke to me of this," she managed to say, her voice barely above a whisper as the room full of Gila City's most prominent citizens turned to stare at her. Abraham Zimmerman, a successful merchant who had built his fortune supplying mining operations throughout Arizona territory, dismissed her concern with a wave of his hand. "Girls your age don't know what's best. Edgar is 42, established, and willing to take you despite your headstrong nature." Edgar Thornton, standing beside her father, merely smiled with the confidence of a man who had just acquired a new piece of property. His eyes moved over her in a way that made Nora's skin crawl beneath her blue calico dress. "I'll be a good husband," Thornton said, his voice carrying the honey-sweet tone of a snake oil salesman. "Your father's businesses will join with my banking interests. It's a perfect match." Nora looked desperately toward her mother, Sarah, but saw only resignation in the woman's downturned eyes. At 38, her mother had long ago surrendered her own will to Abraham's decisions. "I need air," Nora managed to say, setting aside her embroidery and making her way through the crowd of well-wishers who had already begun to congratulate the future groom. The April evening was mercifully cool as Nora stepped onto the porch of their 2-story home, the largest in Gila City. The town had grown rapidly since gold was discovered in the hills around them, transforming from a dusty outpost to a bustling community of nearly 2,000 souls in just a few years. She gripped the porch railing, her knuckles white with tension. Tears threatened but didn't fall. Nora Zimmerman had never been a crier, not when she fell from her first horse at age 10, not when her beloved grandfather passed 2 winters ago, and not now when her life was being sold away. "You look like you could use a friend right about now." The voice came from below, where a man she didn't recognize was leaning against a hitching post. He wore dusty riding clothes, a worn leather vest over a faded blue shirt, and a hat that had seen better days. But it was his eyes that caught her attention, kind but intense, the color of the sky just before dusk. "I don't know you, sir," Nora said, straightening her posture, "and I'm not in need of conversation with strangers." The man smiled, touched the brim of his hat respectfully. "Mason Aldridge, madam, new to town as of yesterday, just hired on as foreman at the Stillwater Ranch." He nodded toward the house. "Sounds like congratulations are in order, though you don't look particularly pleased about it." Nora glanced back at the parlor windows, where shadows moved behind the lace curtains. "It's not your concern, Mr. Aldridge. Fair enough." He straightened up from the post. "But where I come from, a person's got the right to choose their own path, even a woman." His words were simple, but carried a weight that resonated through her. "And where exactly is that magical place?" she asked, unable to keep the bitterness from her voice. "Nowhere special. Just lived my life believing that forcing someone into something against their will isn't right." He started to walk away, then paused. "You know, Miss Zimmerman, you have the right to say no." Those 7 words hung in the air between them as the door behind Nora opened and her father's voice boomed out. "Nora, come back inside immediately. Edgar wants to discuss wedding plans." Mason Aldridge touched his hat brim again, his eyes meeting hers for just a moment longer than propriety allowed. "Evening, madam." He walked away, boots crunching on the gravel street, while Nora turned reluctantly back toward the suffocating parlor, those words echoing in her mind. "You have the right to say no." It was a concept so foreign yet so liberating that it nearly took her breath away. Inside, Edgar Thornton was holding court by the piano, one hand resting possessively on the instrument that had been Nora's sanctuary since childhood. Her fingers itched to play anything to drown out the sound of him discussing their future, as if she weren't even present. "Ah, there she is," Edgar said, extending a hand toward her. "Come, my dear. I was just telling your father that we should honeymoon in San Francisco. The sea air would put some color in your cheeks." Nora forced herself to approach, though she ignored his outstretched hand. "Mr. Thornton, I believe there's been a misunderstanding. I've made no agreement to marry you." The room fell silent. Her father's face darkened like storm clouds gathering over the desert. "Nora," Abraham said, his voice dangerously low, "this is not the time for your childish rebellion." Edgar laughed, a sound that grated on Nora's nerves. "She's spirited, Abraham. I admire that in a filly before she's broken to saddle." The crude comparison made several of the women in the room shift uncomfortably, but no one spoke up. "I am not a horse, Mr. Thornton," Nora said evenly. "And I will not be sold to the highest bidder." Her father crossed the room in 3 long strides, grabbing her arm with enough force to bruise. "You will apologize to Edgar this instant," he hissed. "Abraham, please." Her mother finally spoke up, though her voice trembled. "The guests." "Stay out of this, Sarah," he snapped before turning back to Nora. "You will do as you're told. The arrangements have been made. The announcement will run in tomorrow's paper." Nora looked around the room at the faces of people she'd known her entire life, neighbors, business associates, friends of her parents, and saw nothing but discomfort and averted eyes. No one would stand for her. "I think I should retire for the evening," she said carefully, extracting her arm from her father's grip. "Please excuse me." She left the room with as much dignity as she could muster, climbing the stairs to her bedroom where she closed and locked the door behind her. Only then did she allow a single tear to fall, quickly brushed away with the back of her hand. From her window, she could see the main street of Gila City stretching toward the mountains in the distance. Somewhere out there was freedom and a man whose words had planted a dangerous seed in her mind. "You have the right to say no." The following morning, Nora rose before dawn. She had barely slept, her mind racing with possibilities and fears. After washing her face in the basin, she dressed in her simplest day dress and quietly made her way downstairs. The house was silent except for the ticking of the grandfather clock in the hall and the sounds of their cook, Mrs. Perkins, beginning breakfast preparations in the kitchen. Nora slipped out the front door unnoticed, the early morning air crisp against her face. She had no particular destination in mind, but her feet carried her toward the stables at the edge of their property. The horses were just being fed by Tomas, the stable hand who had taught Nora to ride when she was still small enough to need a mounting block. "Miss Nora," he greeted her with surprise, "you're up with the birds today." "I needed to think, Tomas. Would you mind saddling Penny for me?" He hesitated. "Your father said you weren't to ride alone anymore, said it wasn't proper for a lady of your station." Nora sighed. Of course her father would have given such an order. "I won't go far, just down to the creek and back. Please, Tomas. I need this." The old stable hand studied her face for a moment, then nodded. Just be back before the household is properly awake, eh? I'll deny I ever saw you if asked." "Thank you," she said, meaning it with all her heart. 10 minutes later she was guiding Penny, her chestnut mare, down the trail that led to Willow Creek. The sun was just beginning to crest the mountains, painting the landscape in shades of gold and rose. It was beautiful, peaceful, and everything her life was not at the moment. At the creek, Nora dismounted and let Penny drink while she sat on a large flat rock, watching the water flow over smooth stones. This had been her thinking spot since childhood, where she came to sort out her troubles or escape her father's temper. "Thought I might find someone out here." The voice startled her so badly she nearly fell into the creek. Mason Aldridge was approaching on a tall bay gelding, his figure silhouetted against the rising sun. "Are you following me, Mr. Aldridge?" she demanded, standing quickly and brushing off her skirts. He dismounted with the easy grace of a man who'd spent his life in the saddle. "Not at all. Stillwater Ranch is just over that rise. I've been riding fence lines since before sunrise." He nodded toward her horse. "Fine animal you've got there." "Thank you," Nora replied automatically, her manners taking over despite her wariness. "Penny's been mine since she was a filly." Mason let his horse join Penny at the creek's edge. "I heard about the announcement while having dinner at the hotel last night. Congratulations seem inappropriate given the look on your face yesterday." Nora stiffened. "You're very forward, sir." "Just honest," he replied with a slight shrug. "Life's too short for anything else." There was something about his direct manner that both unsettled and intrigued her. Men in Gila City were either deferential to her as Abraham Zimmerman's daughter or treated her as a prize to be won. Mason Aldridge seemed to see her as simply a person. "How old are you, Mr. Aldridge?" she asked suddenly. 26 come July," he answered without hesitation. "And you, 18 last month." She sat back down on her rock. "And being married off to a man more than twice my age who looks at me like I'm a prize heifer at auction." Mason winced. Edgar Thornton has a reputation that extends beyond Arizona territory, not a man I'd want around any woman I cared about. "What do you mean?" Nora asked sharply. He hesitated. "It's not fit conversation for a lady's ears." "I think I deserve to know what kind of man my father is forcing me to marry," she countered. Mason sighed, taking off his hat and running a hand through brown hair that curled slightly at the ends. "Thornton owned a gambling hall in Denver before coming here. Word is he had to leave town fast after a girl who worked for him was found beaten nearly to death. Nothing was proven, but—" Nora felt sick. "And you know this how? I worked cattle drives from Texas to Colorado for years. You hear things in saloons, bunkhouses. Men talk." He put his hat back on. "I don't spread rumors, Miss Zimmerman, but when asked directly, I won't lie either." She stood again, pacing along the creek bank. "Even if I believed you, it wouldn't matter. My father has decided. And you have no say, no one to speak for you. My mother hasn't contradicted my father in 15 years of marriage. I have no brothers, no uncles in the territory." She stopped pacing and looked directly at him. "In case you hadn't noticed, Mr. Aldridge, women don't have many rights in this world." "Maybe not by law," he acknowledged, "but by God and natural justice, you have the right to determine your own life. You have the right to say no." There were those words again, spoken with such conviction that Nora almost believed them. "And what would you suggest I do? Run away? With what money?" "To go where?" Mason looked thoughtful. "How well can you ride that mare of yours?" "Better than most men in this county," she answered without false modesty. Riding had always been her one true freedom. "And can you shoot?" Nora stared at him. "I have a small derringer my grandfather gave me before he died. I practice sometimes when no one's watching." She wasn't sure why she was telling him this, except that something about Mason Aldridge made her want to trust him. "Good," he said simply. "Those are useful skills." "For what?" "For a woman who might decide she has the right to choose her own path." He gathered his horse's reins. "I should get back to work before Mr. Stillwater thinks he hired a shirker." Nora found herself reluctant to see him go. "Will you be in town for the social on Saturday?" "It's at the schoolhouse." A smile crossed his face, transforming his features from merely handsome to something that made Nora's heart skip oddly. "I might find my way there." He mounted his horse with fluid ease. "Think about what I said, Miss Zimmerman. No one should live their life in a cage, especially one built by someone else." He tipped his hat and rode away, leaving Nora with thoughts more turbulent than the creek waters beside her. When Nora returned to the house, the morning's peace shattered instantly. Her father was waiting in the entryway, his face flushed with anger. "Where have you been?" he demanded, blocking her path to the stairs. "I went riding. I needed air." She tried to move past him, but he gripped her arm. "You directly disobeyed me. I forbade you from riding alone." Nora lifted her chin. "I'm 18 years old, Father. I've been riding alone since I was 12. Things are different now. You're engaged to be married. Your behavior reflects on Edgar and me." The mention of Edgar Thornton brought Mason's warnings flooding back to her. "Father, I need to speak with you privately about Mr. Thornton." Abraham's expression darkened further. "There's nothing to discuss. The arrangements are final. The announcement is in today's paper." "But if you knew things about him—" "I know everything I need to know," he cut her off. "He's wealthy, respected, and willing to take a headstrong girl off my hands while securing the future of my business interests." His words stung like a physical blow. "Is that all I am to you? A business transaction?" For a moment, something like regret flickered across her father's face, but it was quickly replaced by his usual stern expression. "You'll thank me when you're living in luxury as Mrs. Thornton. Now go change for breakfast. Edgar will be joining us." Nora climbed the stairs, her legs feeling leaden. In her room, she found that her mother had laid out her best morning dress, a pale green creation with delicate lace at the collar and cuffs. She changed mechanically, her mind elsewhere. The seed that Mason Aldridge had planted was growing, taking root in fertile soil. She had the right to say no. But what would that no cost her? When she descended to the dining room, Edgar Thornton was already seated at her father's right hand, a position of honor. He stood when she entered, his eyes traveling over her in a way that made her feel unclean. "Ah, my beautiful bride," he said, pulling out the chair beside him. "Come, sit by me. We have much to discuss." Nora hesitated, then took the seat opposite him instead, beside her mother, who gave her a warning look. "I was telling your father about the house I'm having built," Edgar continued, as if he hadn't noticed her slight. "4 bedrooms, plenty of room for the children we'll have." Nora nearly choked on her tea. The thought of bearing this man's children made her physically ill. "Edgar has already ordered furnishings from San Francisco," her mother said with forced brightness. "Isn't that thoughtful, Nora?" "Very," she managed to reply. "Though it seems premature." "We hardly know each other, Mr. Thornton," Edgar laughed. "We have a lifetime to become acquainted, my dear. And please call me Edgar." "I prefer to maintain formalities until we are better acquainted," Nora replied, earning a glare from her father. "Spirited indeed," Edgar remarked to Abraham. "But I've always enjoyed a challenge." Breakfast continued in this vein, with Edgar and her father discussing her future as if she weren't present, occasionally directing a question to her that required minimal response. Her mother remained silent except to offer more coffee or comment on the weather. After what felt like an eternity, Nora excused herself. I promised Mrs. Holloway I would help with preparations for Saturday's social at the schoolhouse. Her father frowned. I don't recall you mentioning this commitment. It must have slipped my mind with all the excitement, Nora replied carefully. The children are performing a play and I'm helping with costumes. Such a charitable heart, Edgar remarked. Though once we're married, you'll need to focus your attentions on more appropriate activities for a banker's wife. Of course, Nora said, not meaning it for a moment. Mother, will you accompany me? Mrs. Holloway specifically asked for your advice on the refreshments. Sarah Zimmerman looked surprised but nodded. Yes, I suppose I could. Abraham seemed about to object, but Edgar raised a hand. Let the ladies go, Abraham. It gives us a chance to discuss the business aspects of our arrangement without boring them with figures and percentages. 20 minutes later, Nora and her mother were walking toward the schoolhouse, a small wooden building that served as church, meeting hall, and classroom for Gila City's children. The morning was warming quickly, promising another hot day typical of an Arizona spring. You shouldn't antagonize your father and Edgar, Sarah said quietly once they were out of earshot of the house. It only makes things more difficult. Nora stopped walking. Do you truly believe I should marry him, Mother? A man I don't love. A man old enough to be my father. Sarah glanced around nervously, though the street was nearly empty at this hour. Love comes with time, Nora. I didn't love your father when we married. And do you love him now? Her mother's hesitation was answer enough. I have a comfortable life, you will too. At what cost? Nora pressed. Don't you ever wish you had chosen differently? Sarah's expression grew distant. Wishing changes nothing. We women must be practical. Without a husband's protection, what becomes of us? Spinsters dependent on relatives' charity or worse. There must be another way, Nora insisted. Not in this world. Sarah resumed walking. Come along. We actually do need to speak with Mrs. Holloway, or your father will know you lied. Nora followed, her heart heavy with the realization that she would find no ally in her mother. By the time they reached the schoolhouse, she had resolved to find another path, though what that might be, she had no idea. Mrs. Holloway, the schoolteacher, was indeed preparing for Saturday's social. She gratefully accepted their offer of help, setting Nora to work mending costumes while Sarah discussed refreshments. As she stitched a tear in a child's angel costume, Nora found herself thinking of Mason Aldridge again. There was something about him that sparked a feeling of possibility she'd never experienced before. Not merely attraction, though she couldn't deny he was handsome in a rugged way, but something deeper, as if he could see who she truly was beneath the proper exterior her parents had crafted. Penny for your thoughts, Mrs. Holloway said, sitting beside her with her own mending. You've been staring at that same stitch for nearly 5 minutes. Nora blushed. Just wool gathering, I suppose. I heard the announcement, the teacher said gently. Mr. Thornton is. An interesting choice. Not my choice, Nora murmured before she could stop herself. Mrs. Holloway was silent for a moment. You know, Nora, before I came to Gila City, I was engaged to a man my parents chose, a minister 20 years my senior. Nora looked up in surprise. What happened? I left in the night with nothing but a carpet bag and the money I'd saved teaching piano lessons. A small smile played at her lips. It was scandalous. My family disowned me, but I found my way, became a teacher, and now I answer to no one but myself and the school board. You never married. I never found a man worth giving up my freedom for, Mrs. Holloway replied simply. Though that doesn't mean such men don't exist. The conversation gave Nora much to think about as she and her mother walked home later that morning. Could she do what Mrs. Holloway had done? Strike out on her own? The thought was both terrifying and exhilarating. The days leading up to Saturday's social passed in a blur of wedding preparations that Nora participated in with mechanical detachment. Edgar called daily, bringing gifts she didn't want and touching her hand or arm whenever possible in ways that made her skin crawl. Her father watched her like a hawk, as if sensing her rebellion simmering beneath the surface. On Friday afternoon, Nora managed to slip away to the general store under the pretense of needing ribbon for her hair. The store owner's wife, Mrs. Daniels, was busy with another customer when Nora entered, giving her a chance to browse unobserved. She was examining a display of leather goods when a familiar voice spoke beside her. "Those riding gloves would suit you." Mason Aldridge stood nearby, a list in his hand. He wore cleaner clothes than when she'd last seen him, though his hat was still worn at the edges. "Mr. Aldridge," she acknowledged, glancing toward Mrs. Daniels, who was still occupied. "I didn't expect to see you in town today." "Supply run for the ranch," he explained, showing her his list. "Mr. Stillwater is particular about his coffee." Nora smiled despite herself. "As he should be. Bad coffee is one of life's great disappointments." "Speaking of disappointments," Mason said, his voice dropping lower, "I've been hearing more about your intended. Things that concern me." Nora's smile faded. "Such as?" "There's a woman working at the Silver Spur who knows him from Denver. Says he has a temper that comes out after a few drinks. Says the girl who was beaten wasn't his first victim." Nora felt cold despite the store's warmth. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because I can't stand by and watch you walk into danger." His blue eyes were intense with concern. "Will you be at the social tomorrow night?" "Yes, my parents and Mr. Thornton will be there as well." Mason nodded thoughtfully. "Good, I'll be there too." He glanced toward Mrs. Daniels, who was finishing with her customer. "Miss Zimmerman, I know we barely know each other, but I want you to know that if you ever need help, I'm willing to provide it." "Why?" The question escaped before she could consider it. A smile touched his lips. "Let's just say I recognize a kindred spirit when I meet one. We're both more than what others expect us to be." With that cryptic statement, he tipped his hat and moved to the counter, leaving Nora puzzled but strangely comforted by his words. Saturday evening arrived with the usual flurry of preparation. Nora wore a dress of deep blue silk that her mother insisted brought out her eyes. Her dark blonde hair was arranged in an elegant knot at the nape of her neck, with a few curls framing her face. "You look beautiful," Sarah said as they prepared to leave. "Every eye will be on you tonight." "Including Edgar's," Nora replied flatly. "Lucky me," her mother sighed. "Please try to be pleasant tonight, for all our sakes." The schoolhouse had been transformed for the social. Paper lanterns hung from the rafters. Desks had been pushed aside to create space for dancing, and wildflowers adorned every available surface. Most of Gila City's residents were in attendance, from the wealthiest mine owners to the humblest shopkeepers. Edgar Thornton found Nora immediately, claiming her for the first dance before she'd even had a chance to greet her friends. As they moved around the floor, she was acutely aware of his hand pressing too firmly at her waist, his face too close to hers. "You're the envy of every woman here," he said, his breath hot against her ear, "and soon you'll be all mine." Nora steeled herself not to recoil. "Mr. Thornton, there's something I've been meaning to discuss with you." "Edgar," he corrected. "We're to be married in less than 2 weeks, Nora. Formality seems unnecessary between us now." "That's precisely what I wish to discuss," she persisted. "This arrangement has been made so quickly. Wouldn't it be wise to take more time to become acquainted before committing to marriage?" His grip on her waist tightened painfully. "Your father and I have already drawn up the contracts. The delay would be financially inconvenient." "I see," Nora said, the last of her hope dying. "So this truly is just a business transaction." Edgar's smile didn't reach his eyes. Business and pleasure, my dear. I assure you, I find you most pleasing indeed. The music ended, and Nora stepped away as quickly as propriety allowed. I must help Mrs. Holloway with the children's performance. Please excuse me. She escaped to the back of the room where the schoolchildren were gathering for their play. As she helped adjust costumes and calm nerves, she scanned the room for Mason but didn't see him among the crowd. Had he changed his mind about coming? The thought disappointed her more than she cared to admit. The children's performance, a simple retelling of David and Goliath, went well despite a few forgotten lines and one fallen angel wing. As Nora helped the children return to their parents, she felt a presence beside her. "You're good with them." Mason Aldridge stood nearby, looking surprisingly handsome in a clean white shirt, dark vest, and what appeared to be new trousers. His hair was neatly combed, though one stubborn curl still fell across his forehead. "Mr. Aldridge," she said, unable to keep the relief from her voice. "I wasn't sure you'd come. I said I would." His eyes moved past her to where Edgar Thornton stood talking with her father. "Has he been behaving himself?" "As much as can be expected," Nora replied, unconsciously rubbing her waist where Edgar's fingers had dug in during their dance. Mason noticed the gesture, his expression darkening. "Did he hurt you?" "It's nothing," she assured him quickly. "Just a bit too enthusiastic in his dancing." Before Mason could respond, the music started again, and he surprised her by offering his hand. "May I have this dance, Miss Zimmerman?" Nora hesitated, knowing her father would disapprove, but something rebellious stirred within her. "Yes, you may, Mr. Aldridge." As they took their places for the waltz, Nora was aware of her father's disapproving gaze and Edgar's narrowed eyes. But when Mason's hand settled respectfully at her waist and he began to lead her in perfect time to the music, she found she didn't care about their disapproval. "You dance well for a cowboy," she remarked, surprised by his grace. "I wasn't always a cowboy," he replied with a small smile. "My mother insisted I learn proper dancing and manners before I left home." "And where is home?" "Was home," he corrected. "A small ranch in Missouri. It's gone now." Something in his tone made her not press further. Instead, she said, "I've been thinking about what you said. About having the right to say no. And I want to say no more than anything I've ever wanted, but I don't see how." The words tumbled out in a rush. "My father controls everything, my money, my movements. Edgar is already acting as if he owns me." Mason guided her through a turn, his hand steady at her waist. "What if you had help? Someone willing to get you away from here until you could establish yourself elsewhere?" Nora's heart raced. "Are you offering such help, Mr. Aldridge?" "I might be," he said carefully. "If you were interested. Why would you risk yourself for a stranger?" His blue eyes met hers, serious and direct. "Because I've seen what happens when people are trapped in situations they can't escape. My sister was forced into a marriage with a man who seemed respectable. He beat her so badly she lost their child, and still no one would help her leave him." Nora gasped softly. "What happened to her?" Pain flashed across his features. "She didn't survive her second pregnancy. He was overcome with grief, according to the town, but I knew better. I was too young to help her then, but I'm not too young now." "I'm sorry," Nora whispered, understanding now his intensity on the subject. "Don't be sorry," he said firmly. "Be determined. If you want out of this marriage, I'll help you, but it has to be your decision." The music was drawing to a close, and Nora knew they had little time left. "When and how?" "Tomorrow night," Mason said quickly as they made their final turns. "Pack only what you can carry on horseback. I'll be waiting at Willow Creek at midnight. I can get you to the stage station at Prescott, give you enough money to reach California. You would do that for me. A woman you barely know." The music ended, and Mason stepped back, bowing formally though his eyes never left hers. "I'd do it for anyone in your situation. But yes, especially for you." Before she could respond, Edgar Thornton appeared at her side, his hand gripping her elbow possessively. "Thank you for entertaining my fiancé, Cowboy, but I'll take it from here." Mason's expression revealed nothing as he tipped his hat. "Of course, sir." "Miss Zimmerman, thank you for the dance." As he walked away, Edgar pulled Nora close, his whispered words carrying an unmistakable threat. "You would do well to remember your position, my dear. Once we're married, I won't tolerate such public displays." Nora looked into his cold eyes and knew in that moment that she could not marry this man. Whatever risk Mason's plan entailed, it couldn't be worse than a lifetime shackled to Edgar Thornton. "I understand perfectly," she replied, her decision made. The remainder of the social passed in a blur. Nora danced when required, smiled when appropriate, and all the while, her mind raced with plans for the following night. She would need money, clothing suitable for travel, her mother's locket with the family photograph inside, the derringer her grandfather had given her, a few precious books she couldn't bear to leave behind. When they finally returned home shortly before 11, Nora feigned exhaustion and retired immediately to her room. Once alone, she sat at her writing desk and composed 2 letters. The first was to her mother, explaining her decision and asking for understanding if not forgiveness. The second was to her father, shorter and more direct, stating simply that she would not be sold into marriage and that he should not attempt to find her. She sealed both letters and hid them beneath her pillow. Tomorrow night, she would leave them where they would be found after she was gone. Then she climbed into bed, surprisingly calm now that her path was chosen. Morning brought the usual Sunday rituals: church, followed by a family dinner that now included Edgar Thornton as a regular guest. Nora played her part perfectly, giving no indication of her plans. She even managed to smile when Edgar presented her with a gaudy diamond brooch that she suspected was paste rather than genuine stones. "It's lovely," she lied. "How thoughtful of you." "Only the best for my bride," he replied, clearly pleased with her response. "I've arranged for the dressmaker to visit tomorrow. We must ensure you have a suitable trousseau." "Tomorrow?" Nora's heart skipped a beat. "I thought perhaps Wednesday would be better. I have commitments at the church Monday morning." Edgar waved dismissively. "Your mother can handle those. The wedding is less than 2 weeks away. Every day counts." "Of course," Nora agreed, her mind racing. She would need to be even more careful than planned if the house would be full of people tomorrow. After dinner, she managed to slip away to her room under the pretense of a headache. Once alone, she began her preparations in earnest, packing a small carpet bag with essential clothing, her derringer carefully wrapped in a shawl, and the few keepsakes she couldn't bear to leave behind. The hours crawled by with excruciating slowness. Nora paced her room, watching the sun set and darkness fall over Gila City. By 10 o'clock, the house was quiet except for the occasional creak of the floorboards as the night watchman, hired by her father after a series of burglaries in town, made his rounds. At 11:30, Nora changed into her riding clothes, a divided skirt she'd secretly commissioned from the dressmaker for picnics, a sturdy blouse, and her most comfortable boots. Over these, she wore a dark cloak with a deep hood that would conceal her fair hair. She placed the letters on her pillow, arranged the bedding to look as if someone were sleeping beneath the covers, and took one last look around the room that had been hers since childhood. Then, carpetbag in hand, she slipped out onto the balcony that connected to a trellis she had climbed countless times in her youth. The descent was more difficult than she remembered, especially while trying to keep her bag from banging against the wall. When her feet finally touched the ground, She waited breathlessly in the shadows, listening for any sign that she'd been detected. Hearing nothing, she made her way cautiously to the stables. Tomas wouldn't be there at this hour. He'd long since retired to his small cabin on the property's edge, but she knew the routine of the night watchman and had timed her movements accordingly. When she reached the stable, she quickly located Penny's stall. The mare nickered softly in recognition, and Nora whispered soothingly to her as she worked by the dim light of a small lantern, saddling Penny with practiced hands despite their trembling. She secured her carpet bag behind the saddle, then led the horse quietly out the back of the stable where the soft earth would muffle the sound of hooves. Only when she was well away from the house did Nora mount and set off at a trot toward Willow Creek. The night was clear, the moon nearly full, providing enough light to navigate the familiar trail. Her heart pounded with fear and exhilaration. She was doing it, breaking free, choosing her own path for the first time in her life. The creek was silver in the moonlight when she arrived, but there was no sign of Mason. Nora dismounted, leading Penny to water while she scanned the area anxiously. Had he changed his mind? Or worse, had he been discovered and prevented from coming? Just as panic began to rise in her throat, she heard the soft sound of hoofbeats approaching. Mason appeared on his bay gelding, his figure momentarily silhouetted against the starry sky before he rode down to join her. "You came," he said, relief evident in his voice as he dismounted. "I wasn't sure you would." "Neither was I until last night," Nora admitted. "Edgar made it very clear what kind of husband he would be." Mason's jaw tightened. "Did he hurt you?" "Not physically." "Not yet." She stroked Penny's neck nervously. "What happens now?" "We ride north toward Prescott. It's about 60 miles. We can make it by tomorrow evening if we push hard." He pulled a small leather pouch from his saddlebag. "This is for you. Enough money to buy a stage ticket to San Francisco and survive until you find work." Nora stared at the pouch. "I can't take your money." "You can and will," Mason insisted, pressing it into her hand. "Consider it a loan if your pride demands it. Pay me back someday when you're settled." "Why are you really doing this?" she asked, unable to believe his generosity came without conditions. Mason sighed, running a hand through his hair in a gesture she was beginning to recognize. "Because it's the right thing to do. Because no one helped my sister when she needed it. And because—" He hesitated. "Because in the short time I've known you, I've seen a spirit that deserves to be free." Something in his voice made Nora's heart flutter strangely. "I don't know how I'll ever repay you for this. Live a life of your own choosing. That's repayment enough." He checked his pocket watch. "We should move. I want to be well away from Gila City before dawn." They mounted their horses and set off at a steady pace, following a trail that wound through the foothills north of town. Mason led the way, occasionally glancing back to make sure Nora was managing the rough terrain. The night air grew cooler as they climbed higher, and Nora pulled her cloak more tightly around her. Despite the chill and the uncertainty ahead, she felt a growing sense of liberation with each mile that separated her from Gila City and the life that had been planned for her without her consent. They rode in companionable silence for the most part, stopping occasionally to rest the horses and once to eat a small meal of jerky and biscuits that Mason had packed. As they sat on a fallen log, watching the first hint of dawn lighten the eastern sky, Nora found herself studying her unlikely rescuer. "Tell me about yourself, Mr. Aldridge. Beyond being a cowboy with a penchant for rescuing damsels in distress." He smiled slightly. "Not much to tell. Grew up on a small ranch in Missouri. Lost my parents and sister. Worked cattle drives from Texas to Montana. Tried my hand at prospecting but wasn't lucky. Took the job at Stillwater because I was tired of moving around. And now you're moving again. Because of me. Guilt crept into her voice. Mason shook his head. Don't worry about that. Stillwater wasn't meant to be permanent. Nothing ever is. What will you do after? After we reach Prescott, he shrugged. Head further north, maybe. Idaho or Montana territories are always looking for experienced ranch hands. The thought of him disappearing into the vast western territories created an unexpected hollow feeling in Nora's chest. I wish things were different, she said softly. That we'd met under different circumstances. Mason looked at her for a long moment, something unreadable in his blue eyes. So do I, Miss Zimmerman. So do I. They resumed their journey as the sun cleared the horizon, following increasingly rough trails that Mason assured her would make them harder to track. By mid-morning, they had covered a significant distance, but Nora could tell that Penny was tiring. They stopped by a small stream to let the horses drink and rest. We're making good time, Mason said, consulting a small map he carried. Another few hours and we'll reach Johnson Canyon. There's a lined shack there where we can rest properly before the final push to Prescott. Nora nodded, stretching her aching back. She was an experienced rider, but the constant hours in the saddle were taking their toll. You think they're searching for me yet? She asked, unable to keep the worry from her voice. Probably, Mason acknowledged. Your father strikes me as a man who doesn't take kindly to being defied. But we've been careful to stay off the main trails, and the terrain here makes tracking difficult. As if the universe had been waiting for those reassuring words, the distant sound of hoofbeats reached them. Mason's head snapped up, his body suddenly tense. Mount up, he said sharply. Quickly. Nora didn't need to be told twice. She was in the saddle before Mason could even gather Penny's reins for her, her heart hammering against her ribs. They rode hard, pushing their tired horses up a steep incline toward a ridge that offered better visibility. When they reached the top, Mason pulled up sharply, surveying the landscape below. There, he said, pointing to a dust cloud perhaps 2 miles behind them. 4 riders moving fast. They're following our trail. Nora squinted against the sun, her stomach twisting with fear. Can you tell who it is? Not at this distance, but 4 men in a hurry in this part of the country has to be a search party. What do we do? She asked, fighting to keep her voice steady. Mason considered for a moment, his expression grave. We can't outrun them on tired horses. We need to find somewhere to hole up until they pass. He led them down the far side of the ridge, following a dry creek bed that wound through the rocky terrain. After perhaps 15 minutes, he pointed to a narrow canyon off to their right. There. Those rock formations might give us cover. The canyon was barely wide enough for their horses to navigate single file. Towering walls of red sandstone rose on either side, creating deep shadows despite the midday sun. They followed the twisting path until it opened into a small hidden grotto with a spring bubbling up from between the rocks. We'll wait here, Mason decided, dismounting and helping Nora down from her horse. The horses need water, and those rocks will hide us from anyone not specifically looking in this spot. They watered the horses and tied them in the shade of an overhang. Mason then climbed partway up the canyon wall to a position that allowed him to see the way they had come without being easily visible. Now we wait, he said when he returned to Nora's side. With luck, they'll follow the creek bed and miss this turnoff entirely. Nora sank down on a flat rock, suddenly overwhelmed by the reality of their situation. This is my fault, she whispered. I've dragged you into danger because I was too cowardly to face Edgar Thornton myself. Mason sat beside her, his expression serious. There's nothing cowardly about escaping a bad situation. Sometimes running is the bravest thing you can do. But now you're at risk too. If my father or Edgar finds us, they won't be merciful, especially to you. I knew the risks when I offered to help, he assured her, and I don't regret it. They lapsed into tense silence, straining to hear any sound of pursuit. The minutes stretched endlessly, marked only by the quiet dripping of the spring and the occasional stamp of a hoof from their nervous horses. Then came the unmistakable sound of riders approaching. Mason put a finger to his lips, then silently moved to check the canyon entrance. When he returned, his face was grim. They've split up. 2 men are coming this way. Nora felt the blood drain from her face. They found our trail. Stay here, Mason instructed, drawing his revolver and checking that it was fully loaded. Keep out of sight. Before he could move away, Nora caught his arm. Wait. I won't let you face them alone. This is my fight. Mason looked as if he might argue, but something in her expression stopped him. Instead, he simply nodded. Stay behind me, but be ready to run if things go badly. They positioned themselves behind a large boulder near the canyon entrance, Mason with his revolver drawn, Nora with her small derringer now in her trembling hand. The riders drew closer, their voices becoming audible. Waste of time. They probably headed straight for the main road. Thornton's offering $50 to whoever finds her, worth checking every trail. Nora recognized the second voice, Jake Reynolds, one of her father's employees. The horses stopped just outside the narrow entrance to their hiding place. What's this? The first voice asked. Looks like tracks heading into that gap. Too narrow for horses, Jake replied doubtfully. These are horse tracks, plain as day, come on. The sound of dismounting, then footsteps approaching. Mason tensed beside Nora, his grip on his revolver tightening. Stay back, he whispered. If shooting starts, get to the horses. The first man appeared at the canyon entrance, a stranger to Nora, probably one of the hired guns Edgar had been known to employ. He had his pistol drawn and moved cautiously, scanning the shadows. Jake Reynolds followed, his familiar weathered face tight with concentration. When his eyes landed on their hiding place, recognition dawned immediately. Miss Nora, he called uncertainly. That you? Mason stepped out from behind the boulder, his revolver aimed steadily. That's close enough, gentlemen. The hired gun started to raise his weapon, but Mason's voice cut through the tense air. I wouldn't. My trigger finger's mighty itchy today. Jake raised his hand slowly. We don't want trouble. Mr. Zimmerman just wants his daughter home safe. I'm not going back, Nora said firmly, stepping out beside Mason, though staying partially sheltered by his larger frame. Tell my father I'm sorry to disappoint him, but I won't marry Edgar Thornton. Girl, you don't know what you're doing, Jake said, his voice taking on a pleading quality. Your father's beside himself, and Mr. Thornton, he ain't a man you want as an enemy. Is that a threat? Mason asked coldly. Just stating facts, Jake replied, eyeing Mason's steady gun hand warily. He's offered $1,000 for her return and $500 for the man who took her dead or alive. Nora gasped. I wasn't taken. I left of my own free will. The hired gun spat on the ground. That ain't how Thornton sees it. Says this cowboy seduced you away with false promises. That's a lie, Nora said fiercely. Mr. Aldridge is helping me escape a forced marriage to a violent man. Jake's eyes widened slightly at that. Violent? Mr. Thornton. Ask around Denver, Mason suggested grimly. Ask about the women who worked in his establishment there. A flicker of uncertainty crossed Jake's weathered features. He had known Nora since she was a child and clearly hadn't considered that she might have legitimate reasons for fleeing. Jake, Nora said, softening her tone, please. I'm asking you as someone who's known me my whole life. Let us go. Tell them you didn't find us. The hired gun snorted. Don't listen to her. Thornton's money spends better than her gratitude. For a long moment, Jake stood frozen in indecision, his loyalty to Abraham Zimmerman warring with the genuine concern in Nora's eyes. "Miss Nora," he finally said, "if what you're saying about Thornton is true, why not come back and tell your father? He loves you. He wouldn't want you hurt." "My father sees me as a business asset, not a daughter," Nora replied sadly. "He refused to listen when I tried to tell him about Edgar's reputation." Mason kept his revolver trained on the hired gun, who seemed increasingly agitated by the prolonged conversation. "We need to end this one way or another," he said quietly. Jake took a deep breath, then made his decision. "Davis," he said to the hired gun, "ride back and tell the others we checked this canyon. It was just a mountain lion's tracks we saw." The man called Davis stared at him in disbelief. "Are you loco? They're standing right there. That's $500. "It's a young woman's life," Jake countered. "And I've known Abraham Zimmerman long enough to know he'd want his daughter safe even if he disagrees with her choices." Davis's hand twitched toward his gun. "Well, I ain't leaving without." The crack of Mason's revolver echoed through the canyon as he fired a warning shot that kicked up dust at Davis's feet. The man froze, his face paling. "Next one won't miss," Mason promised, his voice deadly calm. "Now, you gentlemen are going to leave your weapons, get on your horses, and ride away. Mr. Reynolds will tell Mr. Zimmerman what his daughter said. You, Davis, can tell Thornton whatever you want, but if you value your life, you'll stay far away from us." With shaking hands, both men removed their gun belts and dropped them on the ground. Davis glared murderously at Mason but made no further moves toward his weapon. "Thank you, Jake," Nora said softly as the men backed toward their horses. The old ranch hand nodded once. "Be careful, Miss Nora. The world ain't always kind to young women alone." "She's not alone," Mason stated simply, his meaning clear. They watched as Jake and Davis mounted their horses and rode away. Only when the sound of hoofbeats had faded completely did Mason lower his revolver. "We need to move," he said urgently. "I don't trust that Davis character to keep his word." They quickly gathered their belongings and saddled the horses. Within minutes, they were back on the trail, pushing northward with renewed urgency. Mason led them on an even more circuitous route now, frequently backtracking or taking unexpected turns to confuse any pursuers. By late afternoon, they had reached the line shack Mason had mentioned earlier, a crude but serviceable one-room cabin used by cowboys working the range far from the main ranch buildings. The door creaked on rusted hinges as Mason pushed it open, revealing a sparse interior with a small iron stove, a rough-hewn table with 2 chairs, and a narrow cot against one wall. "It's not much," he apologized as Nora entered, "but it's shelter for the night." "It's perfect," she assured him, sinking gratefully onto one of the chairs. Every muscle in her body ached from the long ride, and the tension of their encounter with Jake and Davis had left her emotionally drained. Mason busied himself lighting the stove and preparing a simple meal from the supplies he had brought. Nora watched him work, struck by how comfortable he seemed in these rustic surroundings, how capable his hands were at every task. "You really have lived this life a long time, haven't you?" she observed. He glanced up from the beans he was heating. "Since I was 16. My father taught me the basics before that, but I've been on my own for 10 years now." "Do you ever get lonely?" The question slipped out before she could consider its propriety. Mason was quiet for a moment, stirring the beans thoughtfully. "Sometimes," he finally admitted. "The trail can be a solitary place, but there's a freedom in it that makes the loneliness worthwhile." "Freedom," Nora repeated softly. "That's what I'm chasing, isn't it? The right to choose my own path, even if it's a lonely one." "It doesn't have to be lonely," Mason said, his eyes meeting hers briefly before returning to his cooking. There are good people in this world, Nora, people who will value you for who you are, not what you can bring them. The use of her first name without the formal miss created an unexpected intimacy between them. Nora found she didn't mind it. They ate in companionable silence, the simple meal of beans, jerky, and biscuits tasting better than any elaborate dinner she'd had in her father's house. After eating, Mason insisted on taking the floor while Nora used the cot. "I've slept on harder ground than this," he assured her when she protested. "You take the cot." Exhaustion won out over politeness, and Nora gratefully stretched out on the narrow bed. Mason spread his bedroll on the floor nearby and extinguished the lamp, plunging the cabin into darkness broken only by the soft red glow from the stove's vents. "Mason," Nora said softly into the darkness, testing the feel of his name on her lips. "Yes, thank you. Not just for helping me escape, but for showing me that I had the right to choose in the first place." She couldn't see his face in the darkness, but his voice carried a smile when he replied, "You always had that right, Nora. I just reminded you of it." She fell asleep to the sound of his steady breathing, feeling safer than she had in weeks, despite the uncertainty of their situation. Morning came too soon, sunlight streaming through the cabin's single window. Nora awoke to find Mason already up, tending to the horses outside. She splashed water on her face from the basin he had filled for her, and quickly arranged her hair as best she could without a proper mirror. When she stepped outside, the beauty of the landscape momentarily took her breath away. The Line Shack sat on a small rise, overlooking a valley where wildflowers bloomed in vibrant patches of color against the green spring grass. In the distance, mountains rose blue and majestic against the clear sky. "It's beautiful," she said as Mason approached, leading the now saddled horses. "One of the things I love about this life," he agreed, following her gaze. "There's always a new view around the next bend, something you've never seen before." Nora turned to him, suddenly struck by a realization. "I don't want to go to San Francisco," she said. Mason's eyebrows rose in surprise. "Where do you want to go then?" "I don't know exactly, just not to another city where I'll be alone among strangers." She took a deep breath, gathering her courage. Could I come with you, just until I find my footing?" The question hung between them, loaded with implications neither was ready to fully acknowledge. "Nora," Mason began carefully, "the life I lead isn't easy. It's no place for a woman raised with comforts." "I'm stronger than I look," she countered, "and I'm willing to learn. I can cook, so even keep accounts. My father taught me that much about business at least." Mason ran a hand through his hair, visibly conflicted. "It's not just the hardships. There's your reputation to consider. A young, unmarried woman traveling with a man." "My reputation." Nora laughed, though there was little humor in the sound. "I've already ruined that by running away. Everyone in Gila City probably believes I've been compromised already." "All the more reason not to give them real cause to talk," Mason pointed out gently. Nora felt her cheeks flush with embarrassment. "I didn't mean. That is, I wasn't suggesting anything improper, just that we could travel together, perhaps find work in the same town." Mason's expression softened. "I know you weren't, and it's not that I don't want your company, quite the opposite." He hesitated, then added more quietly, "That's part of the problem." The implication of his words sent a flutter through Nora's stomach. "Oh," was all she could manage in response. "Let's get to Prescott," Mason suggested after an awkward moment. "We can talk more about your options there. The town's growing fast. There might be opportunities for both of us." It was a compromise, not a rejection, and Nora nodded her agreement. They mounted their horses and set off for the final leg of their journey to Prescott, the territorial capital and a bustling center of commerce. The day's ride was less tense than the previous one, with no sign of pursuers. They talked more freely now, sharing stories of their childhoods and dreams for the future. Nora found herself laughing at Mason's tales of cattle drive mishaps and cowboy pranks, a genuine, unrestrained laughter she hadn't experienced in years. "My father would be scandalized to hear me enjoying such improper stories," she said after a particularly amusing anecdote involving a cowhand, a rattlesnake, and the ranch owner's prize bull. "Your father seems like a man who could use more laughter in his life," Mason observed. Nora sobered slightly. "He wasn't always so stern. After my brother died of fever when I was 8, something changed in him. He became obsessed with building his business, securing his legacy. I think he saw me as his only chance to extend the Zimmerman name through a suitable marriage." "I'm sorry about your brother," Mason said sincerely. "Loss changes people, not always for the better. Did it change you? After your sister?" Mason was quiet for so long that Nora thought he might not answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was contemplative rather than sad. "It made me see more clearly what matters. Honor, choice, standing up for those who can't stand up for themselves." He glanced at her with a small smile. "So yes, it changed me, but I'd like to think for the better." By late afternoon, the outskirts of Prescott came into view, a proper town with wooden sidewalks, brick buildings, and the distinctive dome of the territorial capital rising above the surrounding structures. After days in the wilderness, the sight of civilization was both welcome and slightly disconcerting to Nora. They stopped at a small creek to freshen up before entering town. Nora did her best to make herself presentable, smoothing her wrinkled riding clothes and arranging her wind-tousled hair. "How do I look?" she asked Mason, suddenly self-conscious. His eyes traveled over her with an appreciation he couldn't quite hide. "Like a woman who knows her own mind," he answered honestly. "It suits you." The unexpected compliment warmed Nora more than she cared to admit. "Thank you." They rode into Prescott as the sun was beginning to set, the streets still busy with the day's final business. Mason led them to a modest hotel on a side street, helping Nora dismount before securing their horses at the hitching rail. "Wait here," he said. "I'll arrange rooms." Nora stood nervously on the sidewalk, acutely aware of curious glances from passers-by. Her riding clothes and travel-worn appearance marked her as an outsider in this town of surprisingly well-dressed citizens. Mason returned quickly. "They have 2 rooms available. I've taken care of the cost for 3 nights. That should give you time to decide your next steps." "Thank you," Nora said, touched by his continued generosity. "I'll repay you once I find employment." "No rush," he assured her, helping her with her carpet bag. "The stage office is closed now, but tomorrow we can check schedules if you still want to head to California." "If." The word hung between them, full of unspoken possibilities. Inside, the hotel was clean and simply furnished. A middle-aged woman with kind eyes showed them to their adjoining rooms on the 2nd floor. "Supper's served until 8 in the dining room," she informed them. "Nothing fancy, but it's hot and plentiful." "Thank you, Mrs." Nora began. "Cooper, Harriet Cooper. My husband and I own the place." She gave Nora an appraising look. "If you don't mind my saying, miss, you look like you could use a hot bath after your travels. I can have one brought up for an extra quarter." "That sounds wonderful," Nora agreed gratefully. The thought of washing away the dust of the trail was suddenly the most appealing thing imaginable. "I'll see to it right away." Mrs. Cooper paused at the door. "Will you be staying long in Prescott?" Nora glanced at Mason, who shrugged slightly, leaving the answer to her. "I'm not certain yet," Nora replied. "I may be looking for employment in the area." Mrs. Cooper's interest visibly increased. "What kind of work do you do, if you don't mind my asking?" I'm skilled with figures and bookkeeping, Nora said. And I've had extensive education in literature, music, and languages. Languages, Mrs. Cooper repeated, clearly impressed. Which ones? French and Spanish primarily, some Italian. The older woman nodded thoughtfully. Interesting, very interesting. My husband and I might know of some opportunities. Perhaps we could discuss it over breakfast tomorrow. I would appreciate that very much, Nora said, surprised by this unexpected turn of events after Mrs. Cooper left. Mason smiled at Nora from the doorway of her room. See. Opportunities already. It seems too good to be true, Nora admitted. Do you think she's just being kind? Prescott's growing fast. Businesses need educated people. He gestured to the adjoining door between their rooms. I'll keep this unlocked on my side in case of, well, just in case. But I'll knock first, always. The consideration in his voice made Nora's heart warm toward him even more. Thank you, Mason, for everything. He tipped an imaginary hat, his blue eyes crinkling at the corners. My pleasure, Miss Zimmerman. I'll meet you for supper after your bath. I'd like that. The promised bath arrived shortly after Mason retired to his own room. Nora sank gratefully into the steaming water, letting it soothe her saddle-sore muscles and wash away the grime of the journey. As she bathed, she found herself thinking about Mason more than was strictly proper: his kindness, his strength, the way his eyes seemed to see directly into her soul. She had known him less than a week, yet he had risked everything to help her escape a fate she dreaded. No man had ever shown such respect for her choices, such willingness to support her independence rather than control it. Was it possible to develop genuine feelings so quickly? Or was she simply confusing gratitude with something deeper? By the time she dressed for supper in the one clean dress, she had packed a simple green cotton that brought out the gold flecks in her hazel eyes. Nora had resolved to approach their situation with caution. Mason Aldridge was a good man who had already done more for her than anyone in her life. She wouldn't complicate things by misinterpreting her own confused emotions. He was waiting for her in the hallway, freshly shaved and wearing a clean shirt that emphasized the breadth of his shoulders. His eyes widened slightly when he saw her. You look lovely, he said simply. Clean makes a world of difference, she replied with a smile. You clean up rather well yourself, Mr. Aldridge. They descended to the hotel's small dining room where a handful of other guests were already eating. Mrs. Cooper bustled over to seat them at a corner table, somewhat removed from the others. For privacy, she explained with a wink that made Nora blush. Clearly, the woman had drawn her own conclusions about their relationship. The meal was indeed simple but delicious: roast beef, potatoes, fresh bread, and apple pie for dessert. As they ate, Mason and Nora discussed her options in hushed tones. The stage to San Francisco leaves twice weekly, Mason told her. Mondays and Thursdays. So you have time to consider alternatives. What will you do? Nora asked, the question that had been foremost in her mind. He hesitated. I'm not sure yet. I can't go back to Stillwater Ranch, that's certain. Word travels fast in ranching circles. Because of me, Nora said guiltily. Because I chose to help someone who needed it, Mason corrected gently. I don't regret that choice, Nora. The intensity in his gaze made her look away, her cheeks warming. Mrs. Cooper seems to think there might be opportunities here in Prescott. It's a good town, Mason agreed. Growing, prosperous, but not so big you'd get lost in it. Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of a tall, broad-shouldered man with a neatly trimmed beard who approached their table with purpose. Mr. Aldridge, Mason Aldridge, he inquired. Mason tensed visibly, his hand moving instinctively toward his side where his revolver would normally be holstered. Who's asking? The man smiled reassuringly. James Cooper, My wife owns this establishment. He gestured to the chair beside Nora. May I join you for a moment? Mason nodded cautiously, and Cooper sat down, his friendly demeanor putting them somewhat at ease. Mrs. Cooper mentioned you were looking for employment opportunities, he said, addressing Nora. And that you, sir, might be in need of a new position as well. Your wife works quickly, Mason observed. Cooper chuckled. Harriet has a good eye for quality folks, and as it happens, I may have prospects for both of you. He turned to Nora. The territorial governor's office is seeking a translator for correspondence with Mexican officials and business interests. They need someone fluent in Spanish and with impeccable penmanship. Nora's eyes widened. That sounds perfectly suited to my skills. As for you, Mr. Aldridge, Cooper continued, I'm on the board of the Cattlemen's Association. We're establishing a new ranch south of town, backed by Eastern investors. They're looking for an experienced foreman, someone who knows the territory and can handle men well. Mason frowned slightly. That's quite a coincidence, Mr. Cooper. Not really, Cooper replied easily. Prescott's booming. We need good people, and my wife has an uncanny ability to match folks with the right opportunities. He stood, placing a business card on the table. The governor's aide will be in my office tomorrow at 10. The ranch manager at noon. If you're interested, come by. After Cooper left, Nora and Mason stared at each other in stunned silence. You think it's legitimate? Nora finally asked. Cooper seems respected, Mason said thoughtfully. And those are very specific offers, not the kind of thing you'd make up on the spot. He picked up the business card. James Cooper, Investments and Property. Seems he's a man of some influence here. It would mean staying in Prescott, Nora pointed out, trying to keep her voice neutral. It would, Mason agreed, his eyes meeting hers. Would that be so terrible? Nora felt a flutter in her chest at the implication in his question. No, she admitted softly. It wouldn't be terrible at all. The next morning, Nora dressed with particular care in her best traveling dress, a navy blue wool that, while not fashionable by Prescott standards, was at least respectable. She arranged her hair simply but neatly, wishing she had brought more of her belongings but grateful for what she had managed to pack. Mason knocked on the connecting door at precisely 9:30. When she opened it, she found him looking more nervous than she had seen him, even during their escape from her pursuers. You look like you're facing a firing squad, she teased gently. Interviews are worse than gunfights, he replied with a self-deprecating smile. At least in a gunfight, you know where you stand. You'll do wonderfully, she assured him. Any ranch would be lucky to have you as foreman. His eyes softened as he looked at her. And any governor would be fortunate to have you translating his correspondence. They walked together to Cooper's office, a well-appointed space above the town's largest mercantile. As promised, the governor's aide, a precise, scholarly man named Whitfield, was waiting to meet with Nora. The interview went better than she could have hoped. Her fluency in Spanish impressed Mr. Whitfield, as did her neat handwriting and quick understanding of the diplomatic nuances involved in the work. Governor Safford has been trying to improve relations with Sonora, he explained. Trade across the border benefits both territories, but miscommunications have caused problems in the past. I understand completely, Nora assured him. Clear, accurate translation is essential to avoid diplomatic incidents. By the end of the hour, she had been offered the position at a salary that, while modest, would allow her to live comfortably in Prescott. The work would be part-time initially, leaving her free to pursue other interests or additional employment if she wished. As she left the office, she nearly collided with Mason in the hallway. He caught her arms to steady her, his face alight with excitement. I got the job, he announced before she could speak. Foreman at the Silvercrest Ranch. They're building it from the ground up, 15,000 acres, prime grazing land. Mason, that's wonderful, Nora exclaimed. And I've been hired as well translator for the governor's office. For a moment, they simply stood there grinning at each other like children. Then, in a move that surprised them both, Mason pulled her into a brief, impulsive hug. When he released her, his cheeks were flushed with embarrassment. "Forgive me," he said quickly. "That was inappropriate." "It was a celebration," Nora replied, her own face warm. "I think we're allowed to celebrate." James Cooper emerged from his office, smiling broadly at the two of them. "I take it the interviews went well." "Very well," Mason confirmed, stepping back to a more proper distance from Nora. "We're both most grateful for your assistance, Mr. Cooper." "Prescott needs good people," Cooper repeated his sentiment from the previous evening. "Now, I suggest you both find suitable accommodations. Mrs. Cooper can help with that. She knows every boarding house in town." By the end of the day, arrangements had been made. Nora would take a room at Mrs. Hollister's boarding house for young ladies, a respectable establishment near the governor's office. Mason would stay at the hotel until quarters at the ranch were completed, likely within a few weeks. Their paths were set separate but parallel, both in Prescott, both beginning new lives of their own choosing. As they walked back to the hotel in the golden light of late afternoon, Nora felt a sense of possibility she had never experienced before. "I should write to my mother," she said suddenly. "Let her know I'm safe." Mason nodded. "That's a good idea, but perhaps not your exact location, at least not yet." "I'll be careful," she promised. "I don't want Father or Edgar coming after me again." "Edgar Thornton doesn't strike me as a man who gives up easily," Mason said, his expression darkening. "But you're establishing yourself here, building a reputation of your own. That will offer some protection." They reached the hotel and paused at the foot of the stairs. Tomorrow, Nora would move to the boarding house. Their time together, at least as traveling companions, was coming to an end. "Would you join me for dinner this evening?" Mason asked. "A proper celebration of our new beginnings." "I'd like that very much," Nora replied, smiling up at him. That night, they dined at Prescott's finest restaurant, a far cry from the elegant establishments of San Francisco or even Denver, but impressive for a territorial capital. Mason wore his best clothes, and Nora had pressed her green dress to perfection. They looked, to all observers, like any respectable couple enjoying an evening out. Over a meal of steak, potatoes, and surprisingly good wine, they talked of their new positions and their hopes for the future. The conversation flowed easily between them, comfortable yet charged with an undercurrent of awareness that neither could deny. "Will you be happy here?" Mason asked as they lingered over coffee. "It's not the life you were raised for." "It's better," Nora said with conviction. "It's a life I've chosen. That makes all the difference. You've shown remarkable courage, Nora. Not many women would have the strength to walk away from everything familiar." "I had help," she reminded him. "I'd still be in Gila City preparing to marry Edgar Thornton if not for you." Mason shook his head. "You would have found another way out. I just happened to be there at the right moment." "Was it just chance?" Nora asked softly. "Sometimes I wonder if there isn't some greater design at work." "My mother would have agreed with you," Mason said with a small smile. "She believed firmly that God puts people in our paths for a reason." "And what do you believe?" He considered the question seriously. "I believe that when good people recognize each other, something special happens. Whether that's divine intervention or just the way of the world, I couldn't say." They walked back to the hotel slowly, neither wanting the evening to end. The stars were brilliant above Prescott, the air cool but pleasant with the sense of spring. "When do you start at the ranch?" Nora asked. "Day after tomorrow." "You, the same." She hesitated, then added, "I suppose we won't see much of each other once we begin our new positions." Mason stopped walking, turning to face her in the light of a street lamp. "Would you like to see each other, I mean?" The directness of the question caught Nora off guard, though it shouldn't have. Mason Aldridge had always been straightforward with her. "Yes," she admitted, her heart racing. "I would like that very much." Relief and something warmer spread across his features. "Good. Because these past few days, despite all the danger and uncertainty, have been the best of my life." "Mine too," Nora whispered. For a moment it seemed he might kiss her. His eyes dropped to her lips and he leaned slightly forward. But then he straightened, ever conscious of propriety. "May I call on you properly at the boarding house? Sunday afternoon, perhaps?" The formal request made Nora smile. "Yes, Mr. Aldridge. You may call on me on Sunday." The following weeks passed in a whirlwind of new experiences for Nora. The work at the governor's office was interesting and challenging. Her skills put to good use translating correspondence and occasionally serving as an interpreter when Mexican officials visited. She settled into Mrs. Hollister's boarding house, making friends with the other young women who lived there: teachers, shop girls, and a nurse from the territorial hospital. True to his word, Mason called on her every Sunday afternoon. They would walk through Prescott's Central Plaza, attend church services together, or sometimes ride into the surrounding countryside on horses Mason borrowed from the ranch. Their courtship, for that was what it had become, though neither had put the word to it, yet progressed with a proper restraint that sometimes tested both their patience. One Sunday in late May, nearly a month after their arrival in Prescott, they rode to a hilltop overlooking the town. A blanket spread beneath a pine tree made a perfect picnic spot, and Nora had packed a basket with chicken, bread, cheese, and apple tarts from Mrs. Hollister's kitchen. "The ranch is coming along well," Mason told her as they ate. "We've brought in 500 head of cattle and built corrals and a bunkhouse. The main house should be finished by July." "It sounds wonderful," Nora said, genuinely happy for his success. "The men respect you already. Mrs. Hollister's nephew works there, and he says you're the best boss he's ever had." Mason looked pleased but embarrassed by the praise. "They're good men. Makes the job easier." He hesitated, then added, "The house will have 4 bedrooms, more space than one man needs." Nora felt her pulse quicken at the implication in his words, but she kept her tone light. "Planning to take in boarders, Mr. Aldridge?" A smile tugged at his lips. "Not exactly." He set aside his plate and turned to face her fully. "Nora, there's something I've been wanting to ask you. Something I've been thinking about since that first night at the social in Gila City." "Yes," she encouraged when he paused. "You came to Prescott looking for freedom, the right to choose your own path. I respect that more than I can say." He took her hand in his touch gentle but sure. "I don't want to be another man trying to decide your future for you, but I do want to be part of that future if you'll have me." Nora's heart was pounding so hard she was certain he must hear it. "Are you asking what I think you're asking, Mason?" "I'm asking if you might consider marriage not as an obligation or a business arrangement, but as a partnership between equals." His blue eyes held hers steadily. "I love you, Nora Zimmerman. I think I have since you stood up to your father and Edgar Thornton with such courage. I love your spirit, your intelligence, your kindness, and if you need more time to be certain of your feelings, I'll wait as long as necessary." Tears welled in Nora's eyes, but they were tears of joy, not sorrow. "I don't need more time," she said softly. "I've known since you risked everything to help me escape. No one had ever put my happiness, my choices, first before." "Is that a yes?" Mason asked, a hint of uncertainty in his voice. "Yes," Nora confirmed, squeezing his hand. "1,000 times yes." The kiss that followed was worth the weeks of waiting tender at first, then deepening with the intensity of feelings too long restrained. When they finally parted, both were breathless and smiling. "There's something else," Mason said, reaching into his pocket and withdrawing a small box. "I've been carrying this around for 2 weeks, waiting for the right moment." Inside the box was a ring not ostentatious like the jewelry Edgar had given her, but perfect in its simplicity. A small diamond set in gold, flanked by 2 tiny sapphires that matched Mason's eyes. "It's beautiful," Nora whispered as he slipped it onto her finger. "How did you afford this on a foreman's salary?" Mason looked slightly sheepish. "I had some savings from my prospecting days, found just enough gold to buy a ring for the right woman should I ever meet her." "I'm glad you waited," Nora said, admiring how the stone caught the sunlight. "So am I," he replied, pulling her close again. "So am I." They were married on a perfect July morning in Prescott's small church, with James and Harriet Cooper standing as witnesses. Nora wore a simple white dress she had made herself, with Mrs. Hollister's help. Mason looked handsome and somewhat nervous in a new suit, his usually unruly hair tamed for the occasion. The ceremony was brief but meaningful, the traditional vows taking on deeper significance for a couple who had fought so hard for the right to choose each other freely. "I now pronounce you husband and wife," the minister declared. "You may kiss your bride, Mr. Aldridge." Mason did so, with a restrained tenderness that nevertheless conveyed the depth of his feelings. When they turned to face the small gathering of friends who had come to witness their union, Nora was surprised to see Mrs. Hollister dabbing at her eyes with a handkerchief. "Never thought I'd cry at a wedding," the usually stoic boarding house keeper admitted. "But you too. There's something right about you together." The celebration afterward was held at the Cooper Hotel, where Nora had first begun to imagine a future in Prescott. As they accepted congratulations and shared cake with their guests, a commotion at the door drew their attention. "I'm looking for Nora Zimmerman," a familiar voice announced. "I'm told she's here." Nora froze, her hand tightening on Mason's arm. Sarah Zimmerman stood in the doorway, travel-worn but elegant as always, her eyes scanning the room anxiously. "Mother," Nora whispered, scarcely believing the sight. Sarah spotted her daughter and rushed forward, heedless of the curious onlookers. "Nora, oh, thank heavens you're safe." They embraced, Nora stiff with shock at first, then melting into her mother's arms as she had so often as a child. When they separated, Sarah noticed the ring on Nora's finger and the man standing protectively at her side. "You're married," she stated, her expression unreadable. "Yes," Nora confirmed, reaching for Mason's hand. "Mother, this is my husband, Mason Aldridge. Mason, my mother, Sarah Zimmerman." Mason bowed slightly. "Mrs. Zimmerman, it's a pleasure to meet you, though the timing is unexpected." Sarah studied him with the careful scrutiny only a mother could manage. "So you're the cowboy who stole my daughter away." "I helped her find her freedom," Mason corrected gently. "No stealing involved." A small smile touched Sarah's lips. "Yes, I see that now." She turned back to Nora. "Your letter finally reached me. Your father kept it from me for weeks, but Mrs. Perkins secretly gave it to me when he was away on business." "He was furious," Nora guessed. "Beyond furious," Sarah confirmed. "And Edgar? Well, his true character revealed itself when you disappeared. The things he said, the threats he made." She shuddered visibly. "I knew then that you had been right to run." "Is father here too?" Nora asked, glancing nervously toward the door. Sarah shook her head. "No, he doesn't know I've come. After I read your letter, I realized I had to see for myself that you were truly safe and happy. I took money from my personal account and left while he was in Tucson." The implications of this stunned Nora. Her mother, who had never defied her father in 15 years of marriage, had traveled alone across the territory to find her. "You left him," she whispered. "Temporarily," Sarah replied. "I needed to make this journey for myself, to see you with my own eyes. What happens when I return?" "That remains to be seen." Mason, sensing the women needed privacy, suggested gently, "Perhaps you'd like some time alone with your daughter, Mrs. Zimmerman. My friends from the ranch are waiting to offer their congratulations, and I should speak with them." After he stepped away, Sarah took Nora's hands in hers. "He seems a good man, kind eyes. Does he treat you well? Better than I ever dreamed possible," Nora assured her. "He respects me, Mother, values my thoughts, my choices. We're partners in every sense." Tears welled in Sarah's eyes. "That's all I ever wanted for you, though I didn't have the courage to fight for it." She glanced toward Mason, who was laughing with a group of cowboys across the room. "He's handsome, too. That doesn't hurt." Nora laughed, relief and joy bubbling up inside her. "No, it doesn't hurt at all." Sarah stayed for 3 days, getting to know Mason and seeing the life Nora was building in Prescott. She visited the governor's office where Nora worked, admired the nearly completed ranch house that would be her daughter's home, and spent long hours in conversation, rebuilding the connection that had been strained during Nora's final year in Gila City. On the morning of her departure, Sarah embraced her daughter tightly on the stagecoach platform. "I'm proud of you," she whispered. "You had the courage I never found until now." "What will you do," Nora asked, "when you return to Father?" Sarah straightened her shoulders, a new determination in her eyes. "I'm going to tell him the truth, that I've seen you, that you're happily married to a good man, and that his arrangement with Edgar Thornton would have been a terrible mistake." "He won't take that well," Nora warned. "No, he won't," Sarah agreed. "But for the first time in 15 years, I find I don't particularly care." She smiled, a hint of mischief in the expression. "I have my own inheritance from my father. I've never touched it, but it's there if I need it." "You could come back here," Mason suggested, joining them after loading Sarah's trunk onto the stagecoach. "If things become difficult, there's always room for family at Silvercrest." The offer clearly touched Sarah. "Thank you, Mason. I'll remember that." She kissed Nora's cheek one last time. "Be happy, my darling girl, and remember you made the right choice." As the stagecoach pulled away, Nora leaned against her husband's solid strength, watching until her mother was out of sight. "Do you think she'll be all right?" Mason wrapped an arm around her shoulders. "She's stronger than she knows, like her daughter." They walked back through Prescott, the town that had become their home in such a short time. People greeted them warmly. The Aldridges were already becoming known and respected in the community. "No regrets?" Mason asked as they paused at the corner where their paths would separate for the day, he to the ranch, she to the governor's office. Nora looked up at him, this man who had given her the courage to claim her right to choose her own destiny. "Not a single one," she assured him, standing on tiptoe to kiss him briefly. "How could I regret the best decision I ever made?" Mason smiled, touching her cheek gently. "I'll see you at home tonight, Mrs. Aldridge." "I'll be waiting, Mr. Aldridge," she replied, her heart full of a happiness she had once thought impossible. As she watched him walk away, Nora remembered those words that had changed everything. "You have the right to say no." But equally important, she had discovered, was the right to say yes to the life, the work, and most importantly, the love she had chosen for herself. 5 years later, Nora sat on the wide porch of the Silvercrest ranch house. A sleeping 2-year-old boy nestled against her shoulder while she watched her 4-year-old daughter chase butterflies in the front garden. The ranch had prospered under Mason's management, expanding to 20,000 acres with one of the finest herds in the territory. Nora still worked part-time for the governor's office, her skills as a translator more valued than ever as Arizona's ties with Mexico strengthened. Sarah Zimmerman lived in a cottage on the ranch property, having finally left Abraham after he refused to acknowledge Nora's marriage or his grandchildren. She had found unexpected fulfillment teaching at Prescott's growing school, her gentle manner and cultured background making her a favorite among students and parents alike. The sound of approaching hoofbeats made Nora look up, smiling as she recognized her husband's tall figure on horseback. Mason dismounted with the same fluid grace that had first caught her attention years ago, though now he moved with the confidence of a man who owned his land rather than worked someone else's. "Papa," Emma squealed, abandoning her butterflies to run to her father. Mason swept her up into his arms, her giggles carrying across the yard as he spun her around before setting her back on her feet. "Have you been a good helper to Mama today?" he asked, his voice carrying the same warmth it always held when he spoke to his children. "I helped with the eggs and didn't break any," Emma reported proudly. "And I read a whole page in my book." "That's my smart girl," Mason praised, ruffling her dark blonde curls before climbing the porch steps to where Nora sat with their son. He bent to kiss her, then gently touched Thomas's sleeping cheek. "How's our little cowboy today?" "Exhausted from helping his grandmother bake cookies," Nora replied with a smile. "Mother spoils them terribly." "That's what grandmothers are supposed to do," Mason reminded her, settling into the chair beside hers. He reached over to take her free hand, a gesture so familiar and yet still so precious. "I saw Jake Reynolds in town today." Nora's eyebrows rose in surprise. "Jake, from Gila City." "What did he want?" "To deliver news, mainly." Mason's expression grew serious. "Edgar Thornton is dead. Apparently he got into a dispute with a miner over a card game in Tombstone. The miner was faster on the draw." "I can't say I'm sorry," Nora admitted after a moment's reflection. "Though I wouldn't have wished such an end on anyone." "There's more," Mason continued. "Your father is ill. Jake thought you should know." Nora was silent for a long moment, conflicting emotions washing through her. Abraham Zimmerman had refused all contact since she'd left Gila City, returning her letters unopened, ignoring the birth announcements of his grandchildren. "How serious is it?" she finally asked. "Serious enough that Jake made the journey to find you. Heart troubles, apparently." Nora looked down at her sleeping son, then at her daughter playing contentedly in the yard. "I should go to him," she said softly. "Whatever has passed between us, he's still my father." Mason squeezed her hand gently. "I thought you might say that." "I've already arranged for James Cooper to manage the ranch for a week. We can leave tomorrow if you wish." "We?" Nora looked up, touched by his understanding. "Of course," Mason said as if it were the most natural thing in the world. "You, me, the children, your mother if she wants to come." "We're a family, Nora. We face these things together." Tears pricked at Nora's eyes. "How did I get so fortunate?" she wondered aloud. Mason smiled, the same smile that still made her heart skip after 5 years of marriage. "You made a choice," he reminded her. "You had the courage to say no to the wrong life and yes to creating the right one." "With the right man," she added softly. "That part was just luck," he said with typical modesty. "Not luck," Nora corrected, remembering that moment on her father's porch when a stranger had spoken the words that changed her life. Providence, perhaps, or maybe just two people recognizing in each other something worth fighting for. They sat together in comfortable silence as the sun began to set over the mountains, painting the sky in shades of gold, and rose much like the morning. Nora had first encountered Mason at Willow Creek. So much had changed since that day, and yet the essential truth remained the same. She had claimed her right to choose her own path, and that path had led to a happiness greater than she had ever imagined possible. As if reading her thoughts, Mason leaned over to kiss her cheek. "No regrets?" he asked, echoing the question he had posed so many times in their early days together. Nora smiled, her heart full as she looked at their sleeping son, their daughter playing in the yard, and the good man beside her who had taught her that sometimes the most powerful word a woman could speak was a simple, life-changing no. "Not a single one," she assured him, just as she always had. "Not a single one.